There had been a military funeral with full honors at Fort Snelling National Cemetery, the kind of ceremony that Marcus had attended for brothers who had fallen in Afghanistan, but never imagined he would orchestrate for himself. The day had been bright and cloudless, the kind of Minnesota summer morning that made everything seem possible and pure. A honor guard in dress uniforms had carried the flag-draped coffin with the solemn precision that honored the fallen, their white gloves stark against the deep blue of the folded banner that would be presented to the next of kin. Sarah had been dressed in black, a color that made her pale skin look almost translucent, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses that couldn't quite conceal the fact that she had been crying since a soldier's confession that shattered the life he left behind. Letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 13 years too late. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she held the yellowed envelope, her name written in handwriting she had tried so desperately to forget. The postmark was smudged, unreadable, but the return address made her blood run cold. Property of the U.S. Army Deceased Effects Division. Inside, 3 pages that would unravel everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and the man she had mourned as a hero. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then I am already dead, and you have lived 13 years believing a lie. The words blurred through her tears as she sank into the kitchen chair where she had waited so many nights for news of Lieutenant Marcus Chen, the soldier who had promised to come home, who had sworn their love could survive any war, the man whose flag-draped coffin she had wept over, whose medals she had accepted with shaking hands, whose memory had haunted every relationship since. But Marcus Chen had not died a hero's death in Afghanistan, as the army had told her. He had not died at all. Not then, not the way she believed. The story begins 3 months before that letter arrived, in a cramped apartment in Detroit, where a man calling himself Michael Carson lived among shadows and empty bottles. His face bore scars that made strangers look away. His left hand was missing 2 fingers, and his eyes held the hollow stare of someone who had seen too much and said too little. The neighbors knew him as a recluse who worked nights at a warehouse, who never spoke of his past, who sometimes screamed in his sleep. They did not know that Michael Carson was really Marcus Chen, a ghost haunting his own life. It had taken him 13 years to find the courage to write the letter. 13 years of watching the news, of seeing Sarah's name in the local newspaper when she had opened her veterinary clinic, when she had gotten engaged to David Hoffman, a good man, a safe man, everything Marcus had failed to be. 13 years of living with the weight of what he had done in those mountains of Helmand province, what he had witnessed, what he had chosen. Marcus remembered the morning when it all went wrong with crystalline clarity, the kind of memory that cuts like glass every time it surfaces. October 15th, 2011. The convoy had been moving through a narrow valley when the world exploded into chaos. IEDs buried in the road, insurgents firing from the ridgelines, his unit scattered and bleeding in the dust. He had crawled behind a destroyed Humvee, calling for backup on a radio that crackled with static and screams. That's when he saw her. The Afghan girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, crouched behind a boulder 50 yards away, her eyes wide with terror as bullets whined overhead. She wore a torn blue dress and clutched a small wooden doll to her chest. In her face, Marcus saw something that would haunt him forever. Not just fear, but a desperate hope that someone, anyone, would save her from the hell that had erupted around them. The choice should have been simple. Save the girl. Get her to safety. Continue the mission. But then Marcus saw the other insurgents moving through the rocks above her position, saw the RPG being aimed directly at his squad's position. He had maybe 10 seconds to act, 10 seconds to choose between the mission and the child, between his brothers in arms and an innocent he had never seen before. I could have saved her, Marcus had written in the letter, his hand shaking so badly the words were barely legible. I could have reached her, pulled her to safety, but I saw Johnson and Martinez pinned down in the open, saw Rodriguez bleeding out behind cover. I made a choice that I have lived with every second since. I provided covering fire for my men and left her there. The girl's scream when the mortar round landed still echoed in Marcus's dreams 13 years later. His squad had survived. All of them made it home to wives and children and lives they rebuilt from the ashes of war. But Marcus had died in that valley, even if his heart kept beating. The man who returned to Sarah 6 months later was an imposter wearing Marcus's face, carrying Marcus's memories of their love, but none of his ability to access them through the wall of guilt that had sealed around his heart. Sarah had noticed the change change immediately. The way he flinched when she touched him, the way he stared out their bedroom window for hours in the dark, the way he drank himself to sleep and woke up screaming names she didn't recognize. She had tried everything: therapy, medication, patience, love that poured from her like water, trying to fill a broken vessel that could hold nothing. You deserved to know the truth then, the letter continued. You deserved to understand why I couldn't touch you without seeing blood on my hands, why I couldn't make love to you without hearing her scream, why I couldn't promise you a future when I was already dead inside. But I was a coward. I thought if I could just pretend hard enough, if I could force myself to be the man you fell in love with, somehow I could outrun what I had done. The breaking point had come on a warm June evening in 2012, almost a year after his return. Sarah had prepared his favorite dinner, lit candles, worn the blue dress he had once said made her look like an angel. She had been trying to tell him something important, something that should have filled him with joy. But when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly, when she whispered the words that should have changed everything, "Marcus, I'm pregnant," he had seen not the future they had planned, but the face of that Afghan girl, the child he had abandoned to save his brothers. The panic attack had been violent, explosive. He had swept the dinner from the table, punched a hole in the wall, and run into the night, leaving Sarah crying among the broken dishes and shattered dreams. When he came home 3 days later, drunk and hollow-eyed, he found her packing. "I can't do this anymore," she had said, her voice broken but resolved. "I love you, Marcus, but I can't love a ghost. I can't build a life with someone who isn't really here." She had lost the baby 2 weeks later. A miscarriage, the doctors said. Stress, they suggested gently. Marcus had learned about it from Sarah's sister, who called him a monster and told him never to contact Sarah again. He hadn't argued. Instead, he had made a different choice. On the night of July 4th, 2012, Lieutenant Marcus Chen died in a car accident on Highway 94 outside of Minneapolis. The vehicle had gone off the road in a rainstorm, burst into flames. The body was burned beyond recognition, identified only by the dog tags found in the wreckage. There had been a military funeral with full honors. Sarah had wept over a coffin that held the charred remains of a homeless veteran Marcus had found dead behind a gas station, a man with no family and no name to remember him by. Marcus himself had watched the funeral from a distance, hidden among the trees of the cemetery as Sarah accepted the folded flag and the hollow gratitude of a grateful nation. He had seen her collapse against her sister's shoulder, had heard her sobs carry across the summer air, and had known that he was witnessing the death of the only pure thing he had ever been part of. "I told myself I was setting you free," the letter read. "I told myself that Sarah Mitchell deserved better than a broken soldier who saw ghosts in every shadow. I told myself that the man you loved was already dead, that I was just making it official. But the truth, Sarah, is that I was running away again, just like I ran from that little girl. I ran from you, from our child, from the possibility that love might be stronger than guilt." For 13 years, Marcus had drifted from city to city, job to job, identity to identity. He had been John Walsh in Phoenix, working construction and living in a trailer park where nobody asked questions. He had been David Porter in Seattle, washing dishes in a restaurant that served the kind of food he and Sarah used to share on their dates. He had been Thomas Gray in Chicago, loading trucks at dawn and drinking himself unconscious at dusk, always moving, always running, carrying the weight of his choices like stones in his chest. But the girl's face had followed him everywhere. He had tried to find out what happened to her, had spent sleepless nights searching military databases and casualty reports, hoping against hope that somehow she had survived. The official records told him nothing. The unofficial ones, the stories shared in veteran forums and support groups, painted a picture he didn't want to see. The village had been shelled for 3 days after the convoy incident. Most of the civilians had been evacuated, but some had stayed behind. Some had died. Marcus would never know if she was among them. The letter that would reach Sarah had been written during one of his darkest nights, in the Detroit apartment where Michael Carson lived his half-life. He had been watching the news, seeing footage of Sarah at a charity event for military families, her hand intertwined with David's, her smile bright but somehow fragile. She looked happy, or at least at peace, and Marcus had realized that 13 years of his self-imposed exile had given her something his presence never could have the chance to heal. I should have stayed dead for you, he had written. I should have let you mourn the hero you thought you loved and build a life with a man who could give you everything I never could. But I am dying now, Sarah, truly dying, and I cannot go to whatever comes next, carrying this lie between us. The doctors had found the cancer 6 months earlier, aggressive, untreatable, a final verdict delivered with clinical detachment. 6 months to live, maybe less. No family to notify, no next of kin to claim his body when it was over. Just Michael. Cousin, warehouse worker whose only legacy would be a footnote in some city record and an unmarked grave. But Marcus Chen had letters to write first. He had written to Johnson and Martinez and Rodriguez, the men whose lives he had saved by sacrificing that unnamed girl. He had told them about the choice he made, about the cost of their survival, about the weight he had carried alone all these years. Their responses had been swift and devastating. Johnson, now a teacher in Ohio, had called him a hero and a fool. In the same breath, Martinez, a father of 3 daughters, had wept over the phone and told Marcus he would have made the same choice. Rodriguez had driven from New Mexico to Detroit to sit with Marcus in his apartment. 2 broken soldiers sharing silence and understanding. They forgave me, Marcus had written to Sarah. These men whose lives I saved by damning myself, they forgave me for saving them, but I could never forgive myself for failing you, for choosing to die rather than learning to live with what I had done. The confession had poured out of him across those 3 pages, written in the small hours of the morning when the pain medication made his thoughts flow like water. He had told Sarah about the girl, about the choice that had broken him, about the years of running and hiding and dying by degrees. He had told her about watching her from the shadows of the cemetery, about the newspaper clippings he had collected that chronicled her new life, about the 1,000 times he had picked up the phone to call her and then hung up before dialing. You always ask me what happened over there, what changed me, why I couldn't come back to you completely. I told you it was classified, that I couldn't talk about it, that you wouldn't understand. The truth is simpler and more terrible. I saved the wrong people, Sarah. I chose the lives of my brothers over the life of an innocent child, and in that choice I lost my soul. I lost my right to your love, to our future, to the man I used to be. But the most devastating part of the confession came in the final paragraph, the words that would haunt Sarah long after she finished reading. There is something else. You must know, something I should have told you 13 years ago, when there was still time to matter. That night when you told me about the baby, when I ran from you like a coward, I wasn't running from fatherhood or responsibility or even my own guilt. I was running from the knowledge that I would love that child completely perfectly, the way I had loved you, and that my love was poison. Everything I touch turns to ash, Sarah. Everyone I try to protect ends up hurt. I thought if I disappeared, if I let Marcus Chen die and stay dead, I could break that curse. I thought I could save you from loving a man who destroys everything beautiful in his life. I was wrong. I know that now, when it's too late to matter. Love isn't a curse. It's the only thing that can redeem us, the only force strong enough to transform our wounds into wisdom, our guilt into grace. I should have stayed and fought for us, should have learned to live with my scars rather than inflicting them on you. I should have trusted that your love was stronger than my shame, that together we might have found a way to honor both the child I failed to save and the child we lost because of my cowardice. I should have understood that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that redemption doesn't require perfection, that love means staying in the fire together rather than running into the cold alone. But I was young and proud and broken in ways I didn't understand, and I thought suffering alone was somehow noble, that carrying my guilt in solitude was a form of honor rather than the deepest dishonor I could inflict on the woman who loved me. The letter had been sealed and stored with his few possessions, along with instructions for the army to deliver it to Sarah Mitchell in the event of his death. Marcus had not expected to live long enough to second-guess the decision, had not expected the cancer to give him time to reconsider the wisdom of opening wounds that had finally begun to heal in Sarah's life. But death, like war, rarely quickly follows. The timeline we expect. The cancer had progressed slowly, more slowly than the doctors predicted. The tumors that should have killed him in months had grown with malicious patience, giving him a winter and spring to reconsider, to watch the snow melt in Detroit and wonder if 13 years of exile had been enough penance for his crimes. During those months, he had begun to venture out more, to walk through the city and watch the world he had hidden from for so long. He had seen mothers playing with their children in Hart Plaza, their laughter carrying across the water like a sound from another world. He had watched couples holding hands on the riverfront, their easy intimacy a reminder of what he and Sarah had shared before war taught him to fear his own capacity for love. He had witnessed the ordinary miracles of human connection, strangers helping each other with directions, teenagers sharing earbuds on the bus, elderly couples walking slowly through the farmer's market with the patience of people who had learned to savor time rather than race against it, and slowly, impossibly, he had begun to imagine a different ending to his story. The fantasy had started small, just the image of walking up to Sarah's clinic, of seeing her face through the window as she worked with the same gentle competence that had made him fall in love with her 20 years earlier. In his imagination, she would look up and see him, and after the shock wore off, they would have the conversation that should have happened 13 years ago. He would tell her about Afghanistan, about the choice that had broken him, about the years of running that had taught him nothing except that geography cannot heal what the heart refuses to forgive. She would be angry, of course. She would have every right to rage at him for the 13 years of grief he had inflicted, for the child they had lost, for the life they could have built if he had been brave enough to accept help instead of choosing martyrdom. But maybe, in the fantasy that grew more detailed with each sleepless night, anger would give way to understanding, understanding to forgiveness, forgiveness to the possibility of redemption. On a warm day in late spring, Marcus had found himself standing outside the veterinary clinic Sarah had opened 5 years after his death. The building was in a converted Victorian house in St. Paul. Its wraparound porch painted the same blue as the dress she had worn the night she told him about the baby. A wooden sign hung beside the door: Mitchell Animal Hospital, where every life matters. Through the window, he could see her working, her hair now shorter and streaked with silver that caught the afternoon light like spun platinum. She was treating a small dog, a golden retriever puppy that couldn't have been more than 3 months old, speaking softly to the worried owner while her hands moved with the sure precision of someone who had learned to heal rather than destroy. The sight of her gentleness, her competence, her ability to comfort both animal and human with equal compassion filled Marcus with a longing so intense it felt like physical pain. For a moment he had imagined walking through that door, imagined the shock in her eyes giving way to recognition, to anger, to all the conversations they had never had. He had imagined trying to explain 13 years in a few sentences, trying to bridge the gap between the man she had loved and the ghost he had become. He had imagined the possibility, however remote, that love might indeed be stronger than shame, that redemption might be possible even for someone who had fallen as far as he had. But then David Hoffman had arrived, carrying coffee in a carrier tray and wearing scrubs that suggested he had come straight from the hospital where he saved children's lives instead of ending them. Marcus watched through the window as Sarah's face lit up when she saw David, watched them embrace with the comfortable intimacy of people who had built something real together over years of shared trust and mutual respect. David said something that made Sarah laugh, the first genuine laugh Marcus had seen from her in any of the newspaper photos or television footage he had collected over the years. The sound carried through the glass and across the street to where Marcus stood hidden among the pedestrians, and it was like hearing music from a country he had been exiled from so long he had forgotten its language. They looked happy together, not the desperate, passionate happiness that he and Sarah had shared in their youth, but the deeper contentment that comes from surviving loss together, from building something sustainable rather than consuming. David looked at Sarah the way Marcus had once looked at her, like she was something precious he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to protect. worked, but there was something Marcus had never learned to offer: the steady reliability of someone who stayed through the hard times instead of running when love demanded more courage than he possessed. Marcus had returned to his apartment that night and thrown away the letter he had been drafting for months, the one that explained everything and asked for nothing except understanding. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. Some loves, once betrayed, cannot be redeemed by explanation or apology. Sarah had found peace with David, had built a life that honored the memory of Marcus Chen, while allowing her to love again without the shadow of his ghosts. He had no right to disturb that peace for the sake of his own need for absolution. The cancer had come finally on a cold morning in October, exactly 13 years after the day that changed everything. Marcus had awakened in his chair by the window where he often spent the nights when the pain made sleep impossible, watching the sun rise over a city that had never become home because home required the possibility of permanence and peace. The neighbors found him 3 days later when Mrs. Kowalski noticed his mail piling up and remembered that Michael Carson had never missed a day of work in the 2 years she had known him. He was sitting in his chair by the window, a photograph of Sarah clutched in his remaining fingers, the picture from their college days that he had carried through 13 years, and as many identities, faded and creased from years of handling, like a prayer card worn smooth by desperate fingers. On the back, in handwriting that had once been steady and sure, someone had written, "For Marcus, who taught me that love is worth fighting for. Forever yours, Sarah." The inscription had been written during their senior year of college, when the world was full of possibility and they were planning a future that seemed as certain as sunrise. She had given him the photograph as a graduation gift, along with a key to the apartment they would share while he completed officer training and she finished veterinary school. It was the only thing of value he had kept through all the years of running, the only possession that connected him to the man he used to be. Now, sitting in her kitchen with the letter spread before her, Sarah felt the weight of 13 years collapsing into this single moment of terrible understanding. The man she had mourned as a hero had indeed been heroic, but not in the way the Army citation claimed. His heroism lay not in the medals they had awarded him, but in the choice to carry his guilt alone, to sacrifice his own happiness rather than burden her with his pain. His cowardice lay not in running from battle, but in running from love. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. David's voice came through the speaker, warm with concern. "Sarah, you missed our lunch. Is everything okay?" She looked at the letter, at the handwriting that had once been as familiar as her own, at the words that had shattered and rebuilt her understanding of the past 13 years. Through the kitchen window, she could see the small garden where she had planted flowers every spring since Marcus died. Yellow roses, his favorite, a memorial to a love she thought she understood. "I'm fine," she said, though the words felt strange in her mouth. I need some time to think. Should I come over?" Sarah closed her eyes, seeing again that young soldier who had come back from war carrying invisible wounds, who had been too proud or too broken to accept the help she offered. She thought of David, patient and kind, who had taught her to love. Again, after she was sure her heart had died with Marcus, she thought of the choices we make and the prices we pay, of the lies we tell to protect the people we love, and the truths that follow us beyond the grave. "Not yet," she said, but soon. After she hung up, Sarah sat in the silence of her kitchen and breathed the letter again, and then a third time, memorizing every word as if they were a prayer or a curse. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, church bells marked the passing of another hour, another day in the life she had built on the ashes of the one she thought she had lost. The letter had ended with a final confession, written in a handwriting grown shaky with illness and regret. "I do not ask for forgiveness, Sarah. That is a gift I forfeited the right to seek 13 years ago when I chose to die rather than live imperfectly in your love. I ask only that you understand. Every choice I made, however wrong, however cowardly, was made from love of you. I disappeared, not because I didn't love you enough to stay, but because I loved you too much to destroy you with my staying. I was wrong, but I was not indifferent. You were the last pure thing in my life, and I thought preserving your memory of who I used to be was more important than admitting who I had become. Build something beautiful with David, Sarah. Have the children we never had. Create the life I was too broken to give you. And if you think of me at all in the years to come, remember not the man who ran away, but the boy who promised to love you forever. That promise, at least, I kept. Even in death, especially in death, I am forever yours, Marcus. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor, Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer where she kept her most precious things. The few photographs that had survived the fire of grief, a pressed flower from their first date, the ring he had never had the chance to give her. Tomorrow, she would call David and try to explain what could not be explained. Tomorrow, she would begin the impossible work of grieving a man she had already mourned, of understanding a love that had been both truer and more flawed than she had ever imagined. But tonight, she sat in the gathering darkness and remembered. A young soldier who had chosen to carry his burdens alone, who had loved her enough to break both their hearts rather than risk breaking her spirit. She thought of the Afghan girl whose name she would never know, whose death had shaped the contours of her own life in ways she was only now beginning to understand. She thought of the mysterious arithmetic of love and sacrifice, of the prices we pay for the choices we make and the choices that are made for us. And in the silence of her kitchen, Sarah Mitchell wept for them all, for the soldier who came home broken, for the woman who loved him, for the child caught in the crossfire of someone else's war, and for the 13 years of truth that had lived and died in the shadows, waiting for courage to bring it into the light. The letter had shattered everything she thought she knew about her life. It had also finally set her free.